Wyoming Territory, June 1876. The smoke rising over the low pine ridge smelled like cedar, flesh, and vengeance. Willa Ransome stood barefoot in the ash of her cabin, her hands shaking, her face streaked with soot and quiet fury. The fire had taken everything: her books, her mother's quilt, her tools, the herbs she had gathered for years and ground by hand. All gone, because she was different. Because she had learned how to set a bone, how to help a woman through childbirth, how to speak a few words of the Shoshone tongue. They did not like that in town. "She's a witch," they whispered. "She talks to Indians, lives alone, unnatural." They waited until she was gone gathering roots, then they came with torches. She had nothing left now but the clothes on her back and the small leather pouch tied to her belt, full of dried yarrow and hope she did not feel. A low whistle sounded from beyond the tree line. She turned fast, heart thudding, ready for more cruelty, but it was not one of them. A man rode out of the trees, lean and tall on a buckskin gelding. Dust clung to his hat brim and to the worn shoulders of his coat. He stopped a few yards away, eyes narrowing at the ruins behind her. "You Willa Ransome." His voice was deep, steady. She nodded, squinting against the sun behind him. He dismounted in one fluid motion. "Name's Boone Mercer. Your brother sent me." Her stomach dropped. "Calvin." Boone nodded once. "He's alive. In Montana now. He said if anything ever happened, I was to come find you." He looked past her again, jaw tightening. "I reckon something happened. Willa's throat burned. They burned it while I was gone, said I don't belong, said I'm wrong." Boone looked at her then, really looked, and Willa felt the weight of it settle over her bones like he saw all of her and did not flinch. "You are not wrong," he said. She looked down at her hands. "I cannot stay here." "No," he said simply. "You cannot." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. She took it, trying not to let her fingers tremble as she drank. "Come with me," he said. "I will take you north. Calvin has land near the Ruby River. You will be safe there." Willa hesitated. Everything she had known was gone, but this man was still a stranger. Boone noticed. "I do not push women into things," he said, "but I promised your brother I would keep you safe, and I keep my word." She looked at him then, dusty, quiet, steady as stone, and something inside her eased. She nodded. They rode out by dusk, Willa behind him on the gelding, her hands pressed to the saddle horn. By the second day, the bruises under her ribs began to fade. He gave her the blanket off his bedroll without fuss. When she woke coughing, he handed her water without asking questions. On the third morning they passed an old mining trail. She asked, "Why did you come? You do not even know me." He looked at her, the tips of his fingers brushing the reins. "I owed Calvin. He saved my life in the war, but even if he had not, I would have come." Willa tilted her head. "Why?" His eyes met hers. "Because I do not like watching good people get burned down." They rode in silence after that, but something had shifted. Her shoulders loosened. His voice came easier. That night they camped near a shallow river. Willa washed her hands and face, then sat near the fire. Boone handed her a tin plate with beans and coffee. She took it, murmuring thank you. "You always live alone?" he asked. She nodded. "Since my mother died. She taught me some things: healing, listening. I helped folks, but they never trusted me, said I talked too soft, walked too quiet." Boone stabbed a stick into the fire. "They feared what they could not control." She looked at him. "And you, do you fear me?" He looked up. "No, I trust what I see, and I see a woman who stood in the ashes and did not cry." Willa's breath hitched. She looked away, but her cheeks warmed. Boone said nothing more, but when she lay down that night, she felt him stretch his bedroll a little closer. Not touching, just near. The next few days passed slower. They crossed into Montana Territory, the sky wide and blue above them. Boone taught her how to hold the reins better, how to spot bad weather. She showed him how to treat a saddle sore with pine resin. They moved together like they had been doing it for years. One morning, they passed a small settlement. Boone stopped short when he saw a girl crying near a wagon. He dismounted. "Stay here," he told Willa and walked over. Willa watched as the girl pointed to a nearby grove. Boone rode in and returned minutes later with a small boy, no older than 4, clinging to his chest. "They got left," Boone said when he came back. "Parents took the rest and left them behind, said they were too much trouble." Willa knelt beside the girl. "What is your name, Clara?" the girl whispered. "And that's my brother Cyrus." Willa glanced at Boone. He nodded. "We will take them with us." The children clung to her that night. Willa sang them a soft tune her mother used to hum. Boone watched from across the fire, his eyes softening. Later, as the stars came out, Boone sat beside her. "You are good with them," he said. "I was not meant to be alone forever," she answered, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just never met someone who stayed." Boone looked at her then, his voice low. "Maybe you have now." She looked at him, her chest tight. "Do you mean that?" "Yes," he said. They did not kiss, not yet. But Willa felt it, something new and strong and steady, growing between them like a seed finally planted in the right soil. By the time they reached the Ruby River Valley, Boone had built a small lean-to for the children behind his wagon. Willa found wild mint and rabbit tobacco to dry. The children laughed again. Boone stood with her one evening, watching the sun dip low over the valley. "I have an extra cabin," he said. "Simple but warm. Yours if you want it." Willa turned to him, eyes shining. "You built it," he nodded. "I built it the year I came back from the war." Thought maybe someday someone would belong there. She stepped closer. "You think that someone might be me?" His voice caught. "Yes." She reached for his hand. He took it, and then finally he kissed her. There was no fire or fear in it, just warmth, just a coming home. Willa closed her eyes and leaned into him, into the man who had seen her in the ashes and still reached for her. She had lost everything. And then she had found Boone. The yellow grass swayed in the high summer wind as Willa stooped along the edge of the creek, her fingers brushing the underside of a white flower's bloom. She pinched the stalk gently, placed it in the woven basket by her knee, and stood slow, her back stiff from crouching. Behind her, Cyrus giggled as he tried to balance a flat stone on his head. Clara sat nearby, stringing wild chokecherry pits onto a length of twine Boone had given her that morning. The children had begun to smile more, though Willa still caught Clara watching the horizon now and again, as if afraid someone might come to take them back. Boone was in the field clearing rocks from a patch of soil just east of the barn. He worked without complaint, sleeves rolled high, dark hair damp with sweat beneath his hat. Willa watched him from the shade of a cottonwood and felt something settle deeper in her chest, a quiet, growing steadiness she hadn't known in all her years alone. She walked toward him with her basket tucked against her hip. "You planning to plant something out here?" she asked, stopping just short of the line he'd marked with stakes and twine. He glanced over his shoulder. "Thought corn might take." "Soil's stubborn but not hopeless." She crouched beside him, reaching down to lift one of the larger rocks. "You'll need to soak it first. This ground hasn't tasted water in weeks." He straightened, brushing his hand over his brow. "Could dig a trench from the creek." "You could," she said. "Or let me show you how I used to draw it with channels and sod. Less work for your back." He looked at her then, not just hearing her but weighing the suggestion as if it mattered, and she knew that to him it did. "I'd like that," he said. They walked back to the cabin together, the children trailing behind with their treasures of leaves and feathers. Boone had built the porch wide and low, and Willa sat there now while Clara curled up beside her, head resting lightly on Willa's thigh. Cyrus leaned against Boone's shin, chewing solemnly on a piece of dried apple. "I got word from Calvin," Boone said after a long moment. Willa tensed. How? Trapper passed through 2 nights ago, had a letter, Calvin's well. Said when the weather cools, he'll ride down with supplies. She nodded, brushing a hand through Clara's hair. He'll be glad to see the children. Boone's hand came to rest on Cyrus's back. He'll be glad to see you too. The silence stretched, not heavy but full. I found your mother's name stitched into the hem of that old shawl, Boone said after a time. In thread the color of smoke. Willa's breath caught. You saved it. I kept what I could from the pack, he said. Didn't know if it mattered. She reached for his hand, her fingers curling around his. It matters. That night, after the children had drifted to sleep beneath the quilts Willa had mended from scraps and old flour sacks, Boone came to the porch where she sat watching the stars appear one by one. You always sit up late, he asked. Only when I feel safe enough to, she said, her voice low. Boone stepped closer, the boards creaking under his weight. Do you feel safe here? She looked up at him. I do now. He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about what kind of life we could build here, the four of us. Willa's pulse fluttered. You mean that? I do, he said. I don't want you to feel beholden, but I'd like to ask if this place feels like yours now too. She turned fully toward him. I used to think I'd always be alone, that there wasn't a place where I could belong without hiding pieces of myself. Boone leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to hide here. She reached up, rested her palm on his cheek. Warmth met her skin and something inside her steadied. I want this life, she said, her voice clear. With you, with them. He didn't answer with words. He kissed her again, slower this time, his hand cradling the back of her neck. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll build something honest, he said. No fear. No fire but the kind we tend together. The stars blinked above them, and in the hush of the night, Willa knew the ashes she had walked through had led her not to ruin but to a beginning. The first frost came quiet, a soft lace of white over the ryegrass and the smokehouse roof. Willa stood just outside the cabin, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, watching her breath furl in the morning air. Boone had gone up the ridge before sunup to check the fence line, and the children were still asleep. Curled together beneath the quilt Clara had stitched from old shirts, Boone never got around to mending. Inside the cabin, the hearth still held warmth. Willa added a split log to the coals, careful not to wake the children, then knelt to grind dried rose hips for syrup. The sharp scent filled the room, brighter than the cold that pressed in at the windows. By the time Boone returned, his boots were rimed in frost and his sleeves damp from the knees down. Came across elk tracks, he said, brushing ice from his hat. Big ones. Might be a bull still moving low. Willa turned from the hearth. We'll need the meat if this cold stays. I was thinking I'd go out tomorrow, Boone said, his voice lower now. Take Cyrus with me for the first part if he's willing. He's steady with his hands, she said, a flicker of pride passing across her face. But he's not slept far from me since we left Wyoming. I'll keep him close. Just a few hours, then I'll bring him back. Cyrus was still small, but his quiet focus had begun to mirror Boone's steady hands, watchful eyes. Willa had seen it when Boone showed him how to mend a strap, how to check a snare without leaving scent behind. The boy listened like every word mattered. Later that afternoon, Clara helped Willa hang strips of apple to dry on the line Boone had rigged beneath the porch eaves. Clara's fingers were red with cold, but she didn't complain. I used to think quiet meant something bad was coming, Clara said suddenly, lifting a slice to the line. Now it just means it's safe. Willa glanced over. It feels different here, Clara nodded. I heard Boone singing low when he rode in last night, thought he didn't know words like that. He doesn't sing for just anyone, Willa said. He did for you. Clara smiled, faint and private. I think he sings for you. Willa didn't answer, but her hands moved slower after that, the quiet between them warm. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Willa stepped out onto the porch. Boone was splitting kindling by lantern light, each swing deliberate, paced. She watched him a moment before speaking. You've been sleeping out in the barn. He paused, the hatchet still in hand. Didn't want to crowd you. You aren't. She stepped off the porch, the hem of her dress brushing frost. I know I've been slow to say what I feel. Not for lack of feeling. Boone set the hatchet down. There's no rush on my part. I'd wait as long as you needed. I don't want you to wait anymore, she said. Not out in the cold, his brow furrowed. You sure? She reached for his hands, rough and warm from the handle. I don't speak easy. But I know this what we've built here, it's not borrowed. It's ours. Boone drew in a breath, the air turning white between them. I was hoping you'd say that. Later, they sat inside by the fire, Willa mending a tear in Boone's work shirt, Boone whittling a length of pine for a new spoon. The quiet was full again, not of absence, but of everything unspoken and understood. Do you miss riding? She asked, not looking up. Some days. But I've had enough miles. I'd rather be still now. She nodded. I was always moving, even when I stayed in one place, looking over my shoulder, listening for what might come. Boone set the whittled pine aside. You don't have to do that anymore. Willa met his eyes. I know. That night, she let him pull her close in the narrow bed they now shared, her head tucked beneath his chin, his hand resting over hers. The cabin was quiet but not empty. The wind pressed against the walls, but the hearth stayed lit. The next morning, Cyrus went out with Boone while Willa stayed behind with Clara, boiling down rose hip syrup and steeping a wash for the girls' chapped hands. Clara asked questions now about plants, the stars, the way to tell time by shadow. Willa answered each one, her voice steady, her hands sure. When Boone and Cyrus returned, they brought back strips of elk meat and a hide thick enough to line the floor. Cyrus beamed, carrying a small pouch of feathers Boone had helped him tie shut. That evening, Boone sat beside Willa on the porch again, the children asleep, the lantern casting long shadows across the yard. I've never had a family, he said. Not one that stayed. Willa leaned against him. You do now. He looked down at her, something quiet and fierce in his expression. You'll marry me then? She turned into his gaze, the answer already in her chest. Yes. They sat there as the stars came out, the field silvered under moonlight, the future unfolding steady as the river below the ridge. The wedding was held in late October, under a sky the color of worn denim, with the cottonwoods along the creek turning gold and rust. Boone cleared a space beside the cabin where the soil was dry and even, and Willa laid out bunches of dried sage and yarrow from her stores, winding them into small bundles tied with thread Clara had dyed using elderberries. There was no preacher nearby, but a neighbor from 5 miles west, a ranch widow named Mrs. Kenzie, had once read for traveling circuit riders and knew how to speak vows with reverence. She arrived in a mule cart, bringing with her a jar of honey and a length of lace meant for Willa's hair. Willa wore her mother's brooch, the one Boone had salvaged from the burned cabin and polished until the silver shone again. Clara helped pin it at her collar. Cyrus carried the ring Boone had carved from walnut wood, tucked in a scrap of linen stitched shut on 3 sides. Boone stood tall in his best shirt, the sleeves still showing the faintest mark of old stitching where Willa had once patched them. His boots were clean, though scuffed from years of use, and his face was freshly shaved except for the line of his jaw, which he'd left rough at Willa's request. When Willa stepped out of the cabin, Boone's breath caught, but he said nothing. She met his gaze, calm and steady, and took his hand without hesitation. Mrs. Kenzie cleared her throat, then began. "I've seen enough seasons to know what's true," she said. "And I see it here. A man who holds his word and a woman whose hands know both healing and strength. That makes a life worth building." Willa and Boone faced each other. He spoke first. "I'll keep your name safe," he said. "And your silence, too. I'll stand beside you when the ground shakes and when it holds steady." Willa's voice was quiet but sure. "I'll walk beside you, not behind. I'll keep the door open for you and the fire warm." Mrs. Kenzie nodded once. "Then it's done. You're husband and wife now, in the eyes of the land and of each other." There was no feast, only fresh bread, boiled beans, and a jar of wild plum preserves Willa had put up 2 weeks earlier. But they ate together under the open sky, with Clara humming a tune she'd learned from Willa, and Cyrus falling asleep with his head in Boone's lap before the sun had fully dipped behind the ridge. That night, after the children were tucked in, Boone and Willa sat by the hearth. The fire was low, throwing soft light across the floorboards. Willa reached for his hand. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She pulled a folded paper from the small box she kept beside her herbs. Boone took it carefully, smoothing the edges. "It's a deed," she said. "From Calvin. He sent it with his last letter. Said he wanted me to have a claim of my own. 30 acres upriver near the old Cottonwood Bend." Boone read the name at the bottom, then looked up. "You want to settle it?" "I want to plant something lasting," she said. "Not just roots below, but above too, trees. Medicine, a place that carries my name." He studied her, then nodded slowly. "We'll build it together." Willa leaned into him, her head resting just beneath his collarbone. Boone wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I never thought I'd belong to a place," she said. "You don't belong to it," Boone answered. "It belongs to you." The fire cracked, low and steady. Outside, wind moved through the dry grass, brushing the cabin like a whisper. Weeks passed. Willa and Boone began walking the deeded land in the mornings, marking where to build a second shelter come spring. Clara took to sketching the plants Willa pointed out, keeping a ledger with careful notes. Cyrus learned to follow Boone's boot prints, matching his stride with growing precision. One morning, Boone paused near a patch of bare earth at the edge of the future homestead. "What would you plant here?" he asked. Willa crouched, pressing her fingers into the soil. "Wild tobacco, for prayers, and blue flax for beauty." Boone knelt beside her. "For us too," she smiled then, rare and full, "for us most of all." That night Boone woke to find Willa standing at the window, her arms crossed, the moonlight on her face. "Bad dream?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. She didn't turn. "Memory. Not nightmare." He rose, crossed the room, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I remembered the smell of smoke," she said. "But this time it didn't reach me." Boone kissed the crown of her head. "It won't touch you again. Not while I live." Willa turned in his arms. "I believe you." They stood there until the moon dipped lower, casting silver across the fields that now bore their name. The snow came late that year, soft and heavy, settling over the valley like a hush. Willa stood in the doorway of the cabin, one hand resting over the rise of her belly, the other holding the latch. A few feet away, Clara was sewing a lining into Cyrus's winter coat, her stitches even and practiced. Boone had gone to the storage shed to fetch the smoked fish they'd packed in brine during the last week of October. Willa listened for his boots crunching over the snow and smiled when she heard them, steady and sure, approaching from behind the barn. "I saw fox tracks near the woodpile," Boone said when he came up the steps. "Could be they've denned under the shed roof again." "We'll leave them be," Willa answered, "so long as they leave the hens alone." He set the bundle of fish down inside and tugged off his gloves. His eyes moved to her belly, now well-rounded beneath her shawl, then back to her face. "You need to rest more," he said. "I do," she said. I just like to watch the snow fall before the chores begin. Boone stepped beside her. You ever think about moving closer to town? No, she said, her voice even. This land has more of me in it than any place I've ever known. He nodded, then kissed the side of her head, just checking. They spent the morning in quiet rhythm. Cyrus helped Boone split kindling, the boy's hands stronger now, though Boone always kept one palm near. Clara finished the coat and brought it to Willa, her shy pride plain when Willa ran her hand over each seam. You'll be good at this, Willa said. I think I already am, Clara answered, not boastful, just sure. By noon, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Boone went to secure the barn doors and Willa sat by the fire, sorting dried elder leaves. Clara laid a shawl over her shoulders without being asked. Across the room, Cyrus sat tracing the edge of a carved wooden horse Boone had given him the winter before. You think the baby will like stories? He asked. I think the baby will like yours best, Willa said. That evening, Boone came in with his collar dusted in snow and a letter in hand. He passed it to Willa, who opened it slowly, careful not to tear the paper. It's from Calvin, she said, scanning the lines. He's coming come spring, bringing seed and a new plowshare. Boone set his coffee down. He'll see how well you've done. We've done, she said, reaching across the table for his hand. That night, Willa woke before dawn, the fire low, her back aching. Boone stirred beside her, reached for her hand without opening his eyes. Just the baby turning, she said. He opened his eyes then and looked at her. You sure? She nodded. Too early yet. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. We're ready whenever it's time. When the labor did come, it came hard and fast, with snow still thick outside and the wind bending the trees eastward. Clara boiled water and kept the hearth hot. Cyrus stood near the door, nervous, until Boone sent him to the barn to count the hens and keep his hands busy. Boone stayed with Willa, his hands steady, his voice low. They said little, but he never left her side. By nightfall, the child was born a girl, wrapped in soft flannel and placed against Willa's chest. Boone held the baby a long time before speaking. She's got your mouth, he said finally. She's got your eyes, Willa replied. Clara brought broth, her hands no longer trembling. Cyrus peeked around the doorframe, then inched closer, eyes wide. Her name? Boone asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Willa looked at their daughter, then at him. Lena, he nodded once. Lena Mercer. She'll grow strong here. In the weeks that followed, the snow deepened but the house stayed warm. Clara took over the cooking while Willa rested. Cyrus helped Boone measure lumber for the second cabin they planned to build come spring. Lena rarely cried, and when she did, Willa's touch quieted her. One afternoon, Boone came in with his hair damp, and Willa looked up from where she sat nursing Lena. You all right? She asked. He moved slow, kneeling beside her. I saw a man riding in from the ridge, Calvin. She laughed softly, relief passing over her features. He's early. He said he wanted to meet her before the thaw. Calvin arrived with a pack mule, 2 sacks of dried peas, and a new tin kettle. He held Lena with the same gentleness he'd once held the rifle that saved Boone's life. He clapped Boone on the back and kissed Willa's forehead. You did well, he said. Later, when the sun set over the ridge and the house was quiet again, Boone and Willa sat on the porch, wrapped in one blanket, Lena asleep on Willa's chest. Boone looked out over the valley. You ever think about how far we've come? I think about what we've built, she said. He turned to her. You made me a home. She leaned into him. We made each other whole. They sat there until the stars came out, the snow glittering like a field of glass. Years passed. The second cabin was built, then a small schoolhouse nearby, where Clara began teaching letters to the neighbor children. Cyrus grew tall, quiet still, but full of skill with his hands. Boone and Willa planted wildflowers along the creek's edge, blue flax, just as she'd said. Lena grew up with the smell of smoke only ever tied to hearths and cooking. She learned to walk between her father's boots and her mother's skirts, and she laughed often. By the time the cottonwoods turned gold again, Willa and Boone had grown into a life thick with quiet joy. Their hands bore the marks of work and time, but their eyes never lost the warmth they carried for each other from the first days north of the ridge. And every morning, before the chores began, Boone kissed her cheek, and Willa whispered his name like it was the first thing worth saying. They had seen fire and ash. They built something better in its place, and it held.